Hi everyone. Howdy McCoskey, back here with you. It's a beautiful day. We haven't had a spectacular day like this for a couple of weeks, so I thought best to do this video outside and give you some nature. In fact, the sun is so bright on my eyes. I hope hope the eyes are open enough that you can actually see me when I'm talking to you. I just wanted to put a video together linking out of the Friday talk that I had of the Matt's frequency metaphor and my bird metaphor, and because I read there were some really good comments that came from that video and some really good emails that has had me just doing some thought in the last few days, and I thought a little update on that in a few areas might be very useful, because so many people have sort of taken that metaphor and seen it as something that they can in some way relate to, that they can relate to. They can relate that the standard frequency rate here is really, really different than it used to be. And how a lot of people have asked, how are we dealing with it? How are you dealing with it? Are there any recommendations for being in a strange reality? And another metaphor of how you can think of what's happened to us and is that we used to all be on 950 AM radio, and slowly over the past, I don't even want to say 6 months, it might have taken a while, I first started noticing what now when I think back to it, of a sort of frequency alteration way back in maybe 2015. So the frequency might have been slowly tuning for several years. But now the frequency is on, now the channel is AM 900. And most of the population has moved to AM 900. But some of us, say a good billion of us on the planet, well, we're still AM 950. You know, they're hearing 950, the Backstreet Boys, and we're hearing 950, Frank Sinatra. And I use those as an example because it's not just that the station has two different songs playing, it's like from two different eras, two different styles, two different everything. And if you try to tell somebody if you're trying to tell a group of 10 people who are hearing the Backstreet Boys that, no, you're hearing Frank Sinatra, it's not going to go well. So where does that take us now? And it ties in a little to me, I think, too, to now that I think back to the Hopi Prophecies, and even to the movies Pleasantville and the Truman Show, which I talk about in my book, Falling for Truth. I read the Hopi Prophecies like 20 years ago, or studied them fairly in depth. I didn't go crazy on them, but I studied them and recognized that they were very clear that we were getting to a point where an old world was ending, a new world was beginning, and that there were two roads. And this is very interesting because it ties into this frequency idea. They talked about two roads, the road of the material and a road of the spiritual. And for a while there was a jagged line between the two roads where you could move from one to the other, but then there'll be a certain point where the jagged line becomes a solid line. And once you hit the solid line, you've made your choice. If you're on the material path, that's what you're on. If you're on the spiritual path, that's what you're on. And there'll be no changing after a certain point of time. And while I sort of course, took it as metaphorically and possibly meaning many things, it now can relate to this time that Matt mentioned in his last video about things seem to be having to happen very quickly now, that there seems to be a speed that's needed to making this stuff, making the things that are in place happen. And maybe somehow it's known that we're reaching that point of change, of this point of no return, where you've made your choice, so to speak. Whatever line you're on at that point, that's where you are. And I don't want to, I've used the term as a material line and a spiritual line, and of course those are just words kind of as the Hopi just gave as headings. Don't think that what I would call the standard spiritual person is going to be on the spiritual line. The one that's, I just came back from Moonbeam's house and we tuned up our chakras and now we're feeling this wonderful energy that's going to just It's going to drive us into a totally new, exciting tantric experience tonight. Those people are on the material realm. You know, the majority of what spiritual people think, what all the big books write about, what's popular, what all the workshops are talking about, that's still materialism with a spiritual side. The real spiritual side, the Hopi talk about, is going deep within yourself for answers, going deep within yourself for knowing the truth of the realm, the truth of yourself, the truth of what's outside the realm, the truth of beyond the bubble. That's the spiritual realm of wanting those answers, doing what it takes to get those answers, and then living that truth. That's a part that people really often miss. They may get some information, but they don't live it. So one of the recommendations is, I've talked about in my other videos about be as human as you can, right? Keep your humanity and all possibility. The other is whatever you've learned on a true spiritual journey, you have to live it. You can't just keep it in a book and think that somehow mental knowledge is okay. Mental knowledge is useful in the gathering process, but at some point the mental knowledge has to become a body knowledge, a sense knowledge, and in fact a knowledge that infuses your entire sense of self, your entire deepest being, if you want to put it that way. Your deepest being is living what you know. That's going to be, if this Hopi prophecy is true, then that's a really important element in this story. Knowing what the real spiritual path is and living what you know. I mentioned the bubble. What's on the other side of the bubble? That the reality we've always known all of our life is you know, it's the analogy of Plato's cave, or it's a bubble of perception, and what we see on it is what we've come to believe, what we've become to be conditioned, and I don't mean that even the way it sounds like. I mean the level of belief and conditioning at a massive level. To even think that you're watching me sitting in a forest with trees around and a rock, that's a complete level of, that's just belief. That's not actually what's here. There's a completely different energetic experience going on. We've just been conditioned to see one of hundreds of possibilities going on in this realm at one time. Castaneda used the terms something like bundles of perception, or streams of millions of streams of perception, I think, something, filaments of light, and we only have learned how to grab a certain number of those filaments to create our world, and most people have been conditioned to use the same filaments to create the same world, to look at it in the same way. And even somebody who's the bird in the tree analogy, well, they're using some different filaments, but that person is still using filaments of the world. And even if you're a bird in the sky, you're still using some of the standard filaments of this reality. So really going outside the bubble is a massive, massive shift. And that leads to the movies Pleasantville and Truman Show, which I like for many reasons. Those movies have tons of terrific discussions. I remember I watched Pleasantville with 4 or 5, I don't want to call them students, but people who were asking me questions, you might say, and at the time. We watched that movie and we talked for 2.5 hours afterwards. That just Pleasantville gave us 2.5 hours of discussion. But the points of the movie that I think are important here, which is the idea of, another sense, what can we do? What can we do when reality is, frequency's dropping, everything's dropping, the people are dropping, in a sense, following the frequency, and all of a sudden you're not. You're in a different place. Even with your family and your loved ones, which must be really, really difficult when you know you're in one place and they're all in another place and you can't communicate. That's got to be tough. But if you think of it this way, what can be done about it? I think if you take the deepest metaphor of those movies, which is an outside source breaking the bubble of reality to bring a totally new set of information in. And I think the greatest thing we can do now probably is, I don't want to say pray for it, but figure out what we can do to call the outside force in. And in these movies, the outside force in Pleasantville, well, that was David and Jennifer, Reese Witherspoon and Tobey Maguire. They came from the outside normal world, were sucked into the television set, into the television show, the 1950s television show, which ran in a particular way with a particular time loop, where everything was exactly the same, and they both introduced they introduced the outside world, this element that the world you've always known is not the world as it is or can be. And this began the great change, right, as the people went from black and white to color. And what was so interesting in that movie is when David finally decided to, for a lot of the movie, he was hiding. He was sort of hiding. He wanted the black and white show, right? Jennifer was already jumping in and meeting the boys she wanted, but David was holding back. He wanted the show. And it wasn't until a certain point of time when he realized he had to share what he knew with these people, with these young men and women who wanted to know. And that took place in the restaurant he was working in. And what was interesting is the restaurant up to that time had been playing rock and roll music, and just that moment when he walks in, everything has changed. They're playing, I think it's Dave Brubeck's Take 5, and they turned it into like this bohemian cafe, this place of thinking and philosophizing, and all of a sudden, David, that tiny little element of the world has already changed now, and David somehow on some level realized he's got to change with it. And he was the outside force that they brought this new information, this new way of thinking that eventually changed the entire town, right? The same in the Truman Show. The Truman Show, for all the things the Truman Show talks about, one of the key elements that's missed is the outside force, the force that gets Truman to actually break the bubble. And that was the character Sylvia. Sylvia, who had nothing to do with the bubble, who was just a minor character, who was like an extra, you might say, in the show, is the one who, for whatever reasons, was drawn to Truman, and Truman was drawn to her. Like she was, and what was so interesting was they made sure in the early scenes with Sylvia, the actress that played her had the most haunting eyes, you might say. Not like the eyes of that Holly woman in They Live. These were just fluid, and you just wanted to go into them, you know? And that was Truman. He wanted to go into what the eyes were leading him, and she's the one who tried to tell him the truth of his realm, which of course just confused him, and he probably didn't believe at the beginning. But something still, right from the beginning, of that, he didn't feel that it was false either. There was something about, he felt the truth in her, and he was going to do whatever he could in his own way to verify, was Sylvia honest to him or was Sylvia lying to him? And I think that was a whole part of the thing of he's tracking her, he's looking for her, he's trying to find her down. It's not so much at the time he wants to be with her, so to speak. He wants to connect with her, to have a more deeper conversation, a deeper understanding, a deeper connection of what was she trying to share with him that day in the library and the beach. So I think that's what we have to do, call this outside force. You can think of it as the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, right? Where the figure of God is reaching out to Adam with the fingers. God's coming out of the bubble, but Adam's reaching to the bubble. That's an important part. You can't just hope that the outside force is just going to break the bubble and show up and here you go, kind of, you know. There's work we have to do to reach the bubble. We have to take our finger and point it back to God. And of course, the symbology of that being the brain and coming out of the pineal gland, and you know, there's a ton of symbolic information. I'm not going to go into this. Actually, the Sistine Chapel is unbelievable symbolism, and for me, it's so wild because everybody's staring at the ceiling. I don't know if you've ever been in the Sistine Chapel in Rome, but everyone stares at the ceiling because it is, of course, it's fantastic. But for me, the knowledge is on the walls. So I'm like the only guy standing in there staring at the walls while everyone else is staring at the ceiling. But anyway, so I think it's a combination of, like I say, these things of being human, of living the truth you've known to this point, knowing you probably don't have all the truth, whatever piece you have, whether it's 10%, 20%, 50%, be grateful for what you've done to get it, and that it's arrived, and show gratitude for it, but live it, and at the same time be willing to pull in more, and be willing to reach, not just individually, but reach collectively for the outside force to come in and bring us that knowledge or that information that we don't have right now. Collaboration, I think, is really important. This little thing that's happened with Matt and I has turned out to be already more than just a guy who's been really nice to recommend my channel and say, hey, you should watch some of what I say. we've already managed in a week that he came up with a great metaphor. I added a great metaphor, I think, and now he did a video a few days ago. I'm doing one today that's trying to build on that. So we're collaborating what each of us have been putting together. I'm doing another collaboration soon with a woman at the We Warrior blog who writes some great historical stuff, and we're putting something together. It might take us another week or two to, but I think also the collaborations between people, where you've got something to share, you've got some knowledge, somebody else has some knowledge, something to share. How can you combine it? How can you bring that together? How can you take what seems separate and just a piece and put the two pieces together or three pieces together, and all of a sudden now we take what was individual and you bring it together into something much, much bigger. So that's kind of where I'm at from the video from last Friday that I wanted to share. I've been getting a lot of great comments. Thank you for that. Thank you, of course, for as well for the emails that have been coming in. There's been lots of very interesting information, particularly some Rennes Le Chateau information that's been great, that I hope will make future videos much, much more deep for you as you watch them. Some people have of course, have also been asking me for help on various elements, particularly there's people with some real challenges out there that have asked for help, and I hope some people don't feel who've asked for help that I'm ignoring them or not helping them. It's just I'm less of a what you call a healer guy. I'm more of a learning how to break the bubble of perception guy. So for the people coming with sort of more of a health or an energy life challenge, I'm trying my best to offer some suggestions, of course, and find someone who I think is trustworthy that can help you. But I hope someone doesn't feel that I'm ignoring them. It's not sort of what you might say my specialty or my field. So I'd rather get you the best help we can get for your situation, and not try to pretend like I can fix or do everything, because I certainly can't. I've got a long way to go with all these areas myself. I'll give you an example. There's a gentleman who we kind of talked a bit and decided that maybe a soul retrieval would be, this is part of frustration for me, so that a soul retrieval might be really good for him, which is not a specific native practice. It's a white person practice, but there's no reason white people can't be using these ancient tools. But generally, anyone who puts the label shaman on themselves is some sort of business person in the game for importance, money, or just they don't really know what the word means. They've never really. You can't learn to be a shaman from some workshops and some books and sitting in meditation for a couple days or a couple weeks or even a couple years. It requires a really deep delving into a lot of darkness of reality, your own darkness, into messy challenges to be able to help people in similar challenges, and it requires the trust of somebody who's done the same. And there's very few of those out there. So this guy, we was trying to look for someone that, okay, who's someone I might trust that I would recommend, that I think, yeah, this is one that's, they're really just trying to share. They're really trying to be helpful, I think. Couldn't find one. Literally could not find one anywhere near this guy, and I got frustrated, and I just said, okay, you know what? I don't do this very often, but fine. I'll do this one kind of for you, And it was a bit disappointing for me to, again, see that here's a time when a lot of people in the world are needing help, and the ones with the sign that says help is here, you have to really wonder how much help they can provide. So I'm just keeping that as a reminder to you that as you're looking for whatever help it is you feel you might need now, really also question, just because the sign says help on the front, just because the sign says I'll fix you on the front, really look into, feel if that's just a sign, or if that's coming, if that really is what's inside that doorway. Speaking of doorways, another really interesting thing that was on my list, and I didn't bring it up earlier, was this idea from Rennes Le Chateau, and the idea of et in Arcadia ego, this idea that a big part of the process is the finding of Arcadia, finding of, and I don't want to say it's like a Garden of Eden or a paradise or some sort of heavenly thing. That's how it gets translated in modern terms. What that area, what that is a place where, is a place of ultimate knowing, is a place of, you might say, ultimate truth, where once you're in ultimate truth, the dream state, the matrix, is not going to have the same kind of effect. Whether you would still be vibrating in this frequency or you vibrate into another frequency, I don't know specifically, but it's more than just a really nice, happy place. It's something really, really powerful. And I think, again, if we go back to Hopi Prophecy and you think, where do these two roads lead? Where's the material? Where is choosing what they call the material road going to lead? Well, I think we can watch the world where it's headed right now and have a pretty good idea where that road's leading. You can start thinking, does the road of the spirit lead to Arcadia? Does that road lead? This came from an email exchange I was having with someone last night. Does the road lead to Arcadia? Does the roadway and the doorway of choosing the spiritual road right now lead to Arcadia? I think it's a fantastic metaphor to keep in the back of our mind, and makes the Rennes Le Chateau videos I'm doing hopefully very much more present, because I'm just not talking about some concept in Greek mythology. I'm just not talking about some ideas and some paintings and some tombs and some artwork in France. We're talking about something that applies right now, and the choices that are being made by people who want to understand the matrix, where that road might lead. Okay, I guess that's all I've got to say for today. Again, thank you for all the subscribers. Thank you for the people who are watching who aren't subscribers and don't want to be signed up to such a thing but still like to watch the videos. That's great. Thank you for the comments, the emails, the suggestions. Again, if you have questions, by all means, send them along. Just be comfortable that I may not be able to answer. I may not be able to guide the guy that has the specific help you need, but hopefully I can help direct you to maybe someone who can. Thanks to the people who've dropped off a donation at PayPal, and thanks for people who've been buying books. Lots of books have been sold lately. That's great. I hope you find something interesting in them. And if you've been getting a book and you've been reading it, let me know how it's going for you. If it's been of value to you to read it. So thanks again. We'll see you in a couple of days with a small video, and then Sunday, Monday, it might take till Monday now, we'll have the next version of the Rennes Le Chateau story on the church at Rennes Le Chateau. Cheers.